It started with 5 words that cracked something deep inside me. "You're a burden, Mom." My son said it so casually, like a passing comment about the weather, but the sting was sharp enough to take my breath away. He was standing in my living room, the one where he'd taken his first steps 35 years ago, and yet in that moment he felt like a stranger. When he added, "I sold Dad's company. Good luck paying rent," I simply smiled and said, "All right, good luck." But inside, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. What he didn't know was that this was the beginning of the lesson of his life. That morning had started like any other. I was arranging fresh lilies in the crystal vase by the window, the one Harold had given me on our 10th anniversary. I just trimmed the last stem when I heard the low hum of a BMW engine pulling into the driveway. My stomach tightened instantly. Wade only visited when he needed something, and it had been 3 months since his last call. Through the window, I saw him step out of the car, sharp in his tailored suit, his jaw set with purpose. Brittany followed heels, clicking sunglasses perched on her head hair, perfect as always. Even from behind the glass, I could see that look of determination. Whatever they'd come for, it wasn't love. The doorbell rang twice sharp and impatient. I set the vase down and opened the door slowly. Wade barely looked at me as he brushed past. "Mom," he said curtly, "we need to talk." Brittany's perfume hit me like a wave as she entered, smiling that brittle smile that had never reached her eyes. "Hello, Agatha," she said sweetly, clutching a leather briefcase like it contained my fate. I led them to the living room, forcing a small smile. "Can I get you coffee?" I asked, trying to hold on to some sense of civility. Wade didn't even sit. "This isn't a social visit," he said flatly. "Sit down. There's something you need to know." I sank into my armchair, the one Harold and I had picked out 40 years ago. Brittany set the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a practiced snap. Wade folded his arms, towering over me. "The company is sold," he said. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "What do you mean sold?" Brittany slid a thick stack of papers across the table. "The sale went through yesterday morning. Wade's been handling everything for months." My pulse roared in my ears. "But I'm still the majority shareholder," I whispered. Wade gave a short, humorless laugh. "Mom, you haven't been involved in the company for years. Not since Dad died. You don't even understand the financials anymore." "That's not true," I said, but even to my own ears, the words sounded small. Brittany leaned forward, her voice dripping with pity. "You can barely manage this house, Agatha. You forget things. You're not the same since Harold passed." The heat of humiliation burned my cheeks, but I kept my composure. Wade's voice softened slightly, but it was the softness of condescension. "Mom, you're 64. The company needs young leadership. You've done enough." The words "young leadership" felt like a slap. "The company is profitable," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "The quarterly reports show—" "They show what Dad built." Wade interrupted. "Not what you can sustain." Brittany smiled as if she were comforting a child. "We're not trying to hurt you, Agatha. We're trying to protect you. The buyer paid well above market value. You'll have enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life." "How much?" I asked quietly. $2.8 million, Wade said. "After taxes, about 1.9 in your account by Friday. Money. That's what it always came down to." I looked at my son, the boy who once cried when his toy airplane broke and saw only a man who valued numbers more than people. "You sold our company," I said slowly without even asking me. Wade's eyes hardened. "I'm asking you now," he said, sliding the pen toward me. "Sign these papers, make it official." Brittany leaned closer. "Think about it, Agatha. No more stress, no more board meetings. You can finally enjoy your life." Wade exhaled sharply. "Mom, you've been a burden since Dad died. You call me for things you should already know. You second-guess every decision I make." The word burden echoed in my head, heavy and poisonous. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I stood. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "All right," I said. "Good luck." Wade blinked. "What good luck?" I repeated and signed where Brittany pointed. My hand didn't shake. When I finished, I handed her the pen and walked to the door. Have a wonderful time in Milan, I said, turning back with a faint smile. Brittany froze. How did you know about Milan? I know more than you think, I said, and closed the door behind them. As their car disappeared down the drive, the silence in my house felt different. Not lonely, but clear. For the first time in years, I felt awake. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Marcus, I said softly. It's time. Marcus arrived before the coffee cooled the same battered leather satchel slung over his shoulder, his expression equal parts concern and recognition. He said the words he asked, settling into Harold's old chair, like he always had a right to be there. I nodded and poured him a cup. He called me a burden, sold what he thought he owned, and asked me to sign after the fact. Marcus exhaled the sound low and steady. Then we follow the plan. I felt the house settle around us as if the walls themselves had been waiting. Begin at the beginning, he said, and I did, letting the story unspool like a ribbon I'd kept hidden in a drawer for decades. In 1983, we had nothing but resolve and a beat-up sedan that smelled like sun-warmed vinyl. Harold had charm that opened doors. I had ledgers that kept them from closing. On paper, he held 60%, and I held 40%. Because in those rooms back then, banks smiled at confident young men and patted diligent young women on the head. The paper never told the full story. The substance lived in subsidiary companies and licensing frameworks and contracts worded like nested dolls. While Harold shook hands under chandeliers, I learned where the power actually slept. By the time Wade joined the company 8 years ago, the skeleton had a second spine, the Meridian Trust. 70% Marcus said more statement than question. 70% of the real value I answered, sliding a folder from my desk. Patents, manufacturing rights, international distribution, and the commercial real estate quietly rehomed to a structure with one beneficiary. He gave me the look he saved for moments when he believed in me more than I believed in myself. And the remaining 30%, he said, glancing toward the front door as if Wade might come back, the name the Austin lease payroll and domestic clients. The part a careless heir could sell. I laid the most recent valuations between our cups. The patents, I said, pointing to the line item, are worth $4 million. The properties in Houston and Phoenix total $3,500,000. The international rights account for $1,700,000. As of yesterday, Meridian Trust sits at approximately $9,200,000. Marcus whistled softly. And Wade just sold the less valuable third for $2,800,000, he murmured, which means the buyer paid a premium for a shell. I thought of Harold's laugh, low and proud, the sound he made when a negotiation turned on the axis of patience. Harold once said, "The flashiest piece is rarely the heart," I said. He was right. We reviewed the timeline we'd drawn up in the quiet months after the funeral when Wade began talking about simplified responsibilities and advisory roles. The recordings were cataloged. The board minutes were notarized. The filings in Delaware were clean and patient as winter. The Milan detail Marcus asked, retrieving a tidy envelope. "Booked," I said. The presidential suite at Palazzo Parigi, courtesy of an account Wade believes holds his inheritance. It closes at midnight Milan time. Their cards will fail at the desk, and the sale proceeds are already routed to my account where they belong. Marcus sipped his coffee, eyes kind. "You could have confronted him with this in your living room." "I could have," I said, and he would have called it hysteria. He needed to feel the cold floor. We sat with that for a while, the afternoon light slowly shifting across Harold's chair arms. I walked him through the last details the emergency line at the bank prepared for my authorization, the notification triggers on the trust portfolio, the email drafts to reassure employees should rumors ripple through Austin. "If he calls you tonight," Marcus asked. "I will answer in the morning," I said, hearing the steel in my own voice. "At business hours. Respect is a clock, too." He smiled at that, then sobered. "Agatha, there will be a moment when this feels like breaking rather than mending." I looked at the picture of our ribbon cutting, Harold grinning at the camera while I watched the crowd. "It already does," I said. "But I know which piece is the fracture and which piece is the bone." At 9:47 a.m. in Milan, 2:47 a.m. in my kitchen, I sat awake with chamomile steam curling around my face and the phone motionless beside my cup. I imagined Wade at a marble counter handing over a glossy card that would come back declined. Imagined Brittany's tight smile thinning the concierge's sympathy, perfectly practiced. The first call would come then, the second, then the layered percussion of desperation. I could feel the vibration before it started, as if the house itself had learned his patterns. When the screen finally lit, the name glowed familiar and far away. I let it ring. The second call arrived 3 minutes later, more insistent, and then the third. By the sixth, the phone skittered on the table like a trapped insect. I picked it up, pressed accept, and said, "Hello, Wade," as if we were beginning something new. "Mom," his voice cracked through the line thin and strained, trying to sound controlled, but already trembling underneath. "There's a problem with the bank accounts. Some kind of technical issue. The funds from the sale aren't showing up." I stirred my tea slowly, the spoon tapping against porcelain like a clock counting down. "That's strange," I said evenly. "Have you called the bank?" Of course I called the bank. His restraint was slipping fast. They said the account was closed yesterday afternoon. How does an account just close itself? I smiled faintly, unseen. "I wouldn't know, dear. Banking isn't really my area of expertise, as you've reminded me." There was a muffled sound, Brittany's sharp voice cutting through in the background, high and panicked. "Tell her to fix it, Wade. Now." When he came back, on his tone was pure command. "Mom, call Marcus. There's obviously been a mistake with the paperwork. The money should have been deposited yesterday." I took a slow sip. "I'll call him in the morning," I said pleasantly. "It's nearly 3 a.m. here. I'm sure it can wait until business hours." "No, it can't wait." His composure finally snapped. "We're in Milan. We have reservations plans. I paid for a suite at one of the most expensive hotels in Europe. Our cards aren't working either." I clicked my tongue softly. "That does sound inconvenient. I hope you brought some cash for emergencies." For a few seconds there was only silence and the sound of his breathing ragged and uneven. "Mom," he said again. "Quieter now. Call Marcus right now and find out where our money is." I tilted my head slightly, savoring the phrasing. "Our money," I repeated. I wasn't aware we had any joint accounts. "The sale money," he shouted. My inheritance, the $2.8 million that should be in my account right now. I set my cup down carefully. "Oh, that money. Yes, I know exactly where it is." Relief flickered in his voice. "Thank God." "So call Marcus and it's in my account." I interrupted where it's always been, where it will stay. The silence that followed was almost beautiful. I could hear the air around him collapse. "What did you say?" he whispered. I said, "The money is in my account." "You can't do this," he said, voice rising. "I sold the company. I have the paperwork. You signed it." "Yes, you did sell the company. And yes, I signed the papers. You sold 30% of Herald Industries for $2.8 million, a fine price for what you actually owned. What are you talking about?" Brittany demanded, grabbing the phone. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Brittany. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Hello, Brittany. How's the weather in Milan?" "Never mind the weather," she snapped. "Wade says you're claiming ownership of assets that belong to him. That's not legally possible. You've seen some incorporation papers," I said lightly, "the ones Wade wanted you to see. Tell me, did you review the Meridian Trust documents, or perhaps the Patterson Holdings subsidiary, the intellectual property filings in Delaware?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I didn't think so. I continued. "You see, Brittany, when you spend 40 years building something, you learn to protect it. You learn that the most important assets are often the ones no one knows exist." Wade's voice broke through again, hoarse and furious. "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son. We're family." "Yes," I said softly, "we are. Which is why you felt comfortable calling me a burden and selling what you thought was my life's work. Tell me, Wade, did you really think I was so senile I wouldn't notice planning?" He stammered. "I wasn't planning anything. I was trying to help you." No, I said you were trying to help yourself to an inheritance you hadn't earned. Brittany's voice was sharp again. This is elder abuse. We'll sue you for everything you have. I laughed, a low, genuine sound. With what money, which lawyers? The ones you can't pay, because your cards don't work. I heard movement voices, maybe hotel staff. The chaos of entitlement unraveling. Wade tried again, his tone wobbling between rage and fear. I'll call Dad's old partners, they'll help me. They'll fund a lawsuit. You mean the partners whose contracts are void because the company they partnered with no longer exists? I asked gently. Or the ones who have already signed with Meridian Trust under more favorable terms? There was a strangled noise on the line. You planned this, he said finally. You planned all of this. No, I said. I prepared for it. I hoped you'd prove me wrong. I hoped you'd value our relationship more than what you could take from me. Mom, he said again, his voice trembling now. How long have you known? 3 years, I answered simply. Since the week after your father's funeral, when you told me I should simplify my responsibilities. 3 years of listening to you whisper about my memory, my age, my worth. 3 years of waiting for you to show me who you really were. Brittany's voice was rising again, shrill and furious. We can't stay here without money. We'll be thrown out of this hotel. Then I suggest you figure something out. I said, my voice calm and cool. You're both such capable people. I'm sure you'll manage. Mom, please. Wade's voice cracked fully now. I made a mistake. Tell me how to fix it. I closed my eyes and felt the pull of something old and maternal stir inside me, the part that had once wanted to fix everything for him. But then I remembered that living room, the word burden echoing in the air. You can start? I said softly, by figuring out how to get home without my help. Consider it a learning experience. You can't just abandon us here, he whispered. I'm not abandoning you, Wade. I'm letting you experience what independence feels like. Isn't that what you wanted? I hung up the phone. The kitchen went silent again except for the ticking of the clock. I made myself another cup of tea and waited for the next call. There would be many more. By noon, my phone had logged 37 missed calls. I let them build like waves, each one weaker than the last, until curiosity finally won. I turned the ringer back on around 10 a.m., not because I wanted to hear him plead, but because I wanted to understand the evolution of panic the same way a doctor studies a patient's symptoms to find the disease beneath. The first voicemails were angry, full of curses and entitlement. Then came the bargaining. Mom, let's just talk, please. We can fix this. By late morning, desperation had bled through every word. When the 38th call came, I was in the garden pruning the roses Harold had planted for our 20th anniversary. I answered before the second ring. Good afternoon, Wade, I said, snipping a wilting bloom. His voice was exhausted, smaller somehow. We need to talk. Really talk. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Face to face. We're coming home. I paused, resting the shears on my lap. With what money? I believe your cards aren't working. I called Uncle Robert, he said, and there was something sheepish in his tone. He's wiring us money for plane tickets. I almost smiled. Robert Harold's brother, the one who'd spent years quietly resenting our success. I could imagine how that conversation went. That was resourceful of you, I said. We'll be home tomorrow evening, he continued. Will you be there? This is my home, Wade. Where else would I be? There was a pause long enough for the wind to shift the rose branches. Mom, I need you to know something. I'm going to fight this legally. I can't let you destroy Dad's legacy. Harold's legacy, I repeated softly. Tell me, Wade, what do you think your father's legacy actually is? He hesitated as though the answer should have been obvious. The company, the business he built from nothing. We built, I corrected gently, your father and I together. But go on. It doesn't change the fact that you're tearing it apart. I set the shears aside, my hands steady. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm protecting it. From who? From you. My honesty caught him off guard. From me. Mom, I'm trying to honor Dad's memory. No, I said, you're trying to cash it out. You saw a number with 6 zeros and thought that was your father's legacy. The line went quiet except for the faint murmur of voices in the background, hotel staff perhaps, or a reminder of where his arrogance had left him. "Did you even ask who you were selling to?" I said finally. "Stewart Industries, right? Do you know what they do?" "They're a conglomerate," he said. "Defensive. A good one. They specialize in stripping companies for parts. Within 6 months, they'd have moved everything to Mexico. 43 families would have lost their jobs before Christmas. Did you know that?" Silence again, longer this time. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." "Did you know Margaret Henley, our office manager, has been with us for 18 years? That her husband's medical bills nearly bankrupted them last winter? Or that Tom Rodriguez, who's worked with us since he was 22, just sent his daughter to college? You would have destroyed their lives for a down payment on a house." I could almost hear his composure unraveling. "Business isn't charity, Mom. Sometimes people get hurt." "You're right," I said softly. "Business isn't charity, but it's not theft either. There's a difference between making hard decisions and making selfish ones." A sharp sound cut through the line. An argument in Italian voices, raised perhaps hotel staff trying to escort them out. "We'll be home tomorrow," Wade said finally. "We'll settle this properly. I look forward to it," I said, and hung up. When the line went dead, I sat in the garden watching the sunlight slide across the petals. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was something quieter. Grief, perhaps, for the boy who used to bring me dandelions as business gifts. I'd spent years preparing for this moment, but no amount of foresight could make it painless. I dialed Marcus. "They're flying home tomorrow," I said when he answered. "Call number 38, and Wade's threatening legal action. He thinks he can overturn the trust." Marcus chuckled softly. "I assume you're ready for that, too." "Pull the video files," I said. "All of them. Board meetings, family dinners, Harold's office recordings, all of them." "Yes. If Wade wants to claim I manipulated his father, we'll let everyone see who was really pulling strings." When we hung up, I walked through the garden until the sun began to set, each shadow long and familiar. For 3 years, I'd been recording quietly, carefully, every conversation, every meeting. Not to trap him, but to protect myself from the one thing women my age are accused of more than anything else: losing their memory. The truth was, I remembered everything. That evening, I made a simple dinner and sat alone in the living room reviewing the reports for Meridian Trust. The empire Wade thought he'd sold for $2.8 million was worth $15 million and growing. Our German partner had exceeded profit projections. Our Tokyo expansion was ahead of schedule. The quiet work continued steady, unstoppable. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "This isn't over. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. B." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "The biggest mistake of my life was letting you into my family. I'm correcting that now." The reply came instantly. "Wade will never forgive you for this." I took a deep breath and wrote, "Good. Maybe now we can have an honest relationship." Then I powered off the phone and let the house fall back into silence. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, accusations, tears, but tonight there was peace. I walked through each room, past photographs of a family that had once felt unbreakable, and whispered softly into the still air, "Harold, I kept my promise." Wade's rental car rolled into my driveway at 6:43 p.m. the next evening, 12 minutes later than the flight tracker had predicted. I watched from the kitchen window the same way I used to wait for him to come home from school, except this time there was no joy, only quiet anticipation. Through the glass, I saw the silhouette step out, my sun-hair disheveled suit, wrinkled eyes sunken from sleepless nights, and Brittany, her makeup smeared, clutching her oversized purse like a life raft. For the first time in years, they looked human, less like conquerors, more like people discovering gravity for the first time. When the knock came sharp and impatient, I didn't rush to answer. I finished rinsing the coffee mugs, dried my hands, and only then walked to the door. Mom, Wade said, standing stiffly in the doorway. "We need to talk." "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." They followed me into the living room, the same room where this had all begun days ago. But everything felt different now. The power dynamic had shifted. Wade perched on the edge of the couch, no longer the towering figure demanding signatures. Brittany sat beside him, fidgeting, her eyes darting across the room as if she could spot her old life hidden among the furniture. "I've brought my lawyer, Wade," said suddenly, as though the declaration could steady him. "He'll be here tomorrow morning. We're going to contest the trust." I smiled faintly. "That's your right," I said, sitting in my armchair. "Though I should warn you, legal challenges against properly structured trusts rarely succeed, especially when there's 30 years of documentation to support them." Brittany's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this to us, Agatha. We had plans our future depended on that money. You quit your job, didn't you?" I said, tilting my head. "I remember you mentioning something about leaving the hospital." "I quit because Wade said we'd be set for life," she shouted, her voice trembling between anger and panic. "We bought a house. The down payment is due next week." "That does sound like a problem," I said calmly. "Poor financial planning often leads to such difficulties." Wade stood abruptly, his control unraveling. "Stop it. You know what you're doing. You've stolen what's rightfully mine. Have I?" I opened a manila folder on the coffee table and spread out the documents. "Let's review what's rightfully yours, shall we?" Wade leaned forward, scanning the pages with frantic eyes. "This is Dad's will," I said, tapping the top page. "As you can see, he left you the business as it existed at the time of his death, 60% of Herald Industries. That included the corporate name, the office lease, the domestic contracts. Nothing more. It says right here," Wade insisted, jabbing at the paper, "I inherit his share, 60% of the company." "Correct," I said. 60% of Herald Industries as it was 3 years ago. "But this," I slid another document forward, "is the amendment your father signed 18 months before his death. It acknowledges that the most valuable assets, the patents, the international contracts, the real estate, were transferred to entities owned entirely by me, assets that were never part of Herald Industries to begin with." "That's impossible," Brittany whispered, snatching the paper. "Harold wouldn't have signed away his assets." "He didn't sign them away," I said, evenly. "He acknowledged reality. I was the one who built those branches. I negotiated those deals. I paid for that land. Harold knew it. He respected it." I watched the realization sink into Wade's face like a slow sunrise after a storm, ugly, necessary, blinding. "You planned this from the start," he said, voice hollow. "You set me up." "I protected what I built," I corrected. "If you'd done your due diligence instead of assuming you'd inherit an empire, you'd have known exactly what you were selling." He began pacing, fingers pressed to his temples. "No. You let me believe you watched me make plans, tell people buy a house, and you said nothing. I gave you exactly what your father left you," I said softly. "If you chose to mistake that for everything else, that was your lesson to learn." "Lesson?" He spun toward me, fury flashing through the exhaustion. "You think this is a lesson?" "Yes," I said. "A very expensive one." Brittany's voice cut in, sharp and bitter. "You recorded us, didn't you?" she said suddenly. "You've been spying on us." I leaned back, meeting her glare. "Protecting myself," I corrected. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Wade's voice filled the room, smooth and confident from a recording 8 months earlier. "Mom thinks the company's worth maybe $3 million tops. She has no idea what she's sitting on. Once I convince her to sell, we'll have enough for the Westlake house and still have millions left. The old lady will probably hand over her accounts, too." Brittany went pale. "You said she was confused," she whispered. "You said the doctors thought it was early dementia." Wade's head snapped toward her. "I never said you absolutely did," she snapped, standing up. "You said we had to act fast before she lost the rest of her mind." I folded my hands, my voice steady. "There were never any such diagnoses. My medical reports are perfectly clear." Brittany stared at him in disbelief. "You lied to me," she said softly. "You lied about everything." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Wade looked at me, desperate now. "I'll contest the trust," he said again, his voice cracking. "I'll prove you manipulated Dad." "With what money?" I asked gently. Uncle Robert paid for your flights, but I doubt he'll bankroll your lawsuit once Harold's lawyer confirms the trust's validity. Brittany stood abruptly, gathering her purse. I'm not staying for this, Wade. Fix it, or I'm gone. I didn't marry a man who'd lose millions through stupidity. She stormed out her heels, clicking against the hardwood, like nails in a coffin. Through the window, I watched her get into the car and slam the door. Wade just stood there, shoulders slumped, the weight of reality pressing him down. What do you want from me? He asked finally, his voice small. I want you to decide whether you love me or only what I could give you, I said quietly. Because one of those has a future and one doesn't. He didn't answer. He just turned and left the door, closing softly behind him. I stayed in that chair, watching the evening light fade from gold to gray, and whispered to the empty room. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Wade's number. Mom, he said quietly. Brittany threw me out of the hotel. I don't have anywhere to go. The spare room's available, I said. Rent's $50 a night. You'll help with housework. $50, he said, stunned. I don't have $50. Then I said gently, you'd better start figuring out how to earn some. Consider it your first lesson in independence. There was silence, then a long sigh. Are you really going to make me homeless? No, I said softly. I'm going to let you learn what home means when you've earned it. 6 months later, the morning sunlight poured through spotless kitchen windows, catching the steam that rose from 2 coffee mugs instead of 1. Morning, Mom, Wade said, appearing in the doorway in jeans and a button-down shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. The designer suits were long gone sold to cover the debts he'd accumulated before humility found him. Morning, I said, smiling softly as I handed him his coffee black, the way he'd learned to drink it after realizing creamers and luxuries didn't define a man. He took a sip, nodding toward the folder on the table. I finished reviewing the quarterly reports last night, the German partnerships outperforming projections by 18%. I sat across from him studying the son I'd nearly lost to arrogance. And Tokyo contracts are nearly finalized, he said proudly. Your instincts about market timing were right again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was steady like a rhythm we'd both finally learned to match. It hadn't been easy. The first weeks after Wade moved into the spare room were brutal. He'd arrived at my doorstep with 1 suitcase and no dignity, agreeing to the terms I'd set $50 a night chores completed, without complaint, no handouts. For days, he sulked like a teenager, bitter and ashamed. But something began to shift the morning I asked him to help reorganize the archives, hundreds of files, contracts, and reports from decades of work. By the second week, he wasn't just sorting, he was reading. By the fourth, he was asking questions. And by the second month, I realized I was teaching him not the entitled boy who had once mocked my memory, but the man who finally wanted to understand what real leadership looked like. Now sitting across from me, his eyes clearer, his voice grounded, I saw glimpses of the child Harold and I had once dreamed he'd become. I have a meeting with the Henderson group this afternoon, I said, stirring sugar into my tea. They can be demanding. Would you like to sit in Wade's face, lit up? Really, they're one of our biggest potential clients. Yes, I said, smiling faintly, and they respond well to people who listen more than they talk. He chuckled, grabbing his notebook. I already reviewed their file past partnerships' current challenges. I have a few ideas on how to position our proposal. I raised an eyebrow. You stayed up late again, didn't you, midnight? He admitted, sheepish. I shook my head, but couldn't hide the pride curling through my chest. You remind me of someone, I said softly, who he asked, your father. The best parts of him. He paused, setting down his cup. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you set up the trusts, when you protected everything from me, did you know it would end up like this, with me working for you, learning from you? I thought for a long moment before answering. I hoped I said. But I was prepared for the possibility that you'd walk away forever, that I'd lose you completely. And what would you have done then? I'd have kept running the company until I couldn't anymore, I said. then sold it to someone who'd protect our employees, but I would have missed you every single day." Wade's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for making you feel like you had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting me." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You didn't make me choose. You made your own choices, Wade. I just made sure they had consequences." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I think I finally understand what you meant that day in the living room when you said respect isn't inherited. It's earned." I smiled. "And you're earning it." The phone rang, breaking the moment. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in months, Brittany. Wade tensed immediately. "Are you going to answer it? I'm curious," I said, pressing the speaker icon. "Hello, Brittany." Her voice, once sharp and smug, sounded small. "Agatha, hi. I hope this isn't a bad time." "Not at all," I said lightly. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," she said. "To you and to Wade. I was wrong about everything. After I left, I moved back in with my parents. I've been job hunting for months, and it's humbling. I forgot what it felt like to earn things." Wade stared at the phone, silent. I also realized Brittany continued that I didn't like who I was when I was with Wade. I was entitled, greedy, and willing to take from someone who had done nothing but love her family. I'm ashamed. Her voice cracked on the last word. I glanced at Wade, who looked more sad than angry. I also wanted to tell Wade something she said softly. "The divorce papers are being filed this week. I'm not asking for anything but my belongings. I don't deserve anything else," Brittany, Wade said gently. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "You weren't the only one who made mistakes, Wade. I pushed you to see your mother as an obstacle instead of an ally. I hope you both can forgive me someday." When the line disconnected, the room was still. "How do you feel?" I asked. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. "Relieved," he said finally. "Sad, but free." I nodded. Sometimes the only way to grow is to lose what doesn't serve you anymore. That afternoon we met with the Henderson group. Wade took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke only when necessary. When they left, they shook his hand first. As the door closed behind them, he turned to me, his expression soft. "I think Dad would be proud of us," he said. I smiled. He always was. He just wanted you to see what he saw. We packed up the meeting notes together, sunlight spilling through the windows like blessing. Mom, Wade said quietly before we left, "Thank you for what I asked, for not giving up on me," he said, "for showing me who I could become instead of who I was." I reached out, straightening his collar, a small motherly gesture that felt new again. "That's what mothers do," I said. "We love you enough to let you fall and enough to help you stand." As we walked out into the golden light of evening, I realized that victory didn't come when you proved someone wrong. It came when everyone finally understood what had been worth fighting for all along. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories like this one. And tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.